Welcome everybody.
Hello.
Get my little cheat sheet there. Thanks so much for coming out. You know, it's kind of rainy outside, cold, perfect day for a lecture. So we're very excited to have John Goff here. Just a couple things, upcoming events. Next weekend, we have the opening reception for our new exhibits, and they'll open to the public on Sunday. That'll be Sunday, November 2nd from 2 to 4, and then there'll be exhibition talks at 2:30. We also have a members preview if you're a gallery member. Just a reminder for those of you that are, or if you want to become one, the members preview is Saturday, November 1st, so next Saturday, and that'll be from 7 to 9 p.m. And we've got some really cool shows, and several of them are up already, so you can go back and take an early preview. We've got the Melita Forsberg Memorial Exhibition. Look, that's a wonderful one. Also, reflecting on Raymer. And one that's kind of new for us, Marked Art That Lives on the Skin, which is kind of a special tattoo exhibition. Never really done a tattoo show, so it's been an interesting experience. And then we'll have our annual holiday gift show, which is back in the corner, which is currently blocked off, but it'll be open for that opening reception. Also, just wanted to let you know, you may have heard through the grapevine, but we're working with Sulis Auctions in Kansas City to have a special auction of some of the things from our collection. There's also going to be some other donated things that's going to be a benefit for our addition that we're constructing. And that'll be on Saturday, November 8th. And it'll be kind of an all-day event. The morning, starting about 10 o'clock, we'll have lectures. Myself, I'll talk about Barrier Sandzen. Corey, our curator, will talk about the Prairie Printmakers. And then we'll have Doug and Ruthie Osa, who are artists from the Kansas City area. And they're going to talk about printmaking in general, and also do some demonstration prints. Doug's just produced a new etching, so he's going to print a few etchings. So that'll be in the morning. They'll also have some appraisers on site. So if you want to have a piece appraised, I know it's a long drive to Kansas City, but they'll be there to help out with that. And then in the afternoon, the auction will start. There will be 4 Sandzen oils from our collection that are kind of duplicate what we already have. There will be 11 Sandzen prints, and I think a variety of prairie printmakers, and then Jim and Virginia Moffett, who live in Kansas City. Jim just recently passed away, and Virginia's not in the best of health. They are downsizing their collection, and so they've generously donated the bulk of the collection to the gallery, and they're also going to be allowing a number of works to be auctioned. Nearly 100 works by regional and Kansas City artists. So it's really going to be an amazing auction. So that'll happen in the afternoon beginning around 2. And the auction is available online. So if you go to sulisauctions.com, you can see what all is going to be auctioned off. So it should be really a cool thing. Now to get to our main event. So John Goff, how long ago did you contact me? Probably 2, 3 years?
I was going to say 3 years, I think, maybe.
Yeah. So he's a relative of Pelham Greenough. And I know a lot of you in this room knew Pelham and Margaret and have stories that you're willing to share with John after we get done here, if you haven't already. But John is a retired restoration architect, architectural historian, and preservation consultant who resides seasonally in Orr's Island, Maine, and that's during the summers, and then Bradenton, Florida during the winters. So for 30 years, he lived and worked in Salem, Massachusetts, where he restored early landmarks and prepared studies on such history-rich buildings as the Nathaniel Bowditch House, which is a National Historic Landmark, and the 17th century Pickering House. I have some Pickering ancestors, but I don't think they came through Salem.
They could have, yeah.
While he also worked with the Dorchester Historical Society to restore the priceless colonial Elder James Blake House in Richardson Park, now Boston's oldest house. With the Francis Wyman Association, he also worked to restore the fire-damaged Georgian-style Francis Wyman House, which is the oldest structure in nearby Burlington, Massachusetts. He was trained in history and American civilization at Brown University, subsequently did work for many preservation organizations, including the Rhode Island Historical Society, Providence Preservation Society, etc. A lot of organizations. Since retiring as an architect and architectural historian in 2019, he has taken up the challenge to develop new educational slideshows, which we'll be seeing today, on various overlooked historical subjects. He has produced a number of new talks on main subjects especially. He's a native of all places, Hutchinson, and his family then relocated to Brunswick, Maine on the East Coast due to a late 1950s military deployment. He is also, as you said, distantly related to the Greenoughs, and I'll let you explain how that link is.
Okay.
So, please welcome John Goff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. Can you all hear all right? I've got to adjust the distance for this microphone. Can you hear me in the back okay? Okay, excellent. Thank you. So yeah, thank you, Ron. That was a great introduction. As I like to say, you put so much stuff in there I don't recognize myself, so that's a good thing. But you asked me to define the relationship with Pell. And so the way it worked out is Pelham was a first cousin of my grandmother, Barbara Greenough Bradley. And Barbara Greenough's, so I'm a granddaughter of the first cousin, Pell. So it's not the most direct.
Your grandson.
I'm a grandson, right, I'm a grandson. Hey, what did I say?
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter, oh, excuse me. I have not embarked on gender fluidity yet, but I'm a grandson. And actually what I thought I'd do, at the risk of being a little personal, I reworked this slideshow so it tells a little bit of my own family perspective and art in the family. So yeah, maybe we should dim the lights and I'll try to jump into this thing. I believe this will be about an hour-long talk. I don't want to talk more than that because I know that can be kind of tiring. But the story really begins, 2 days ago, I was able to step foot in Lindsborg for the first time. My wife and I are now going back from Maine to Florida by way of Lindsborg, which is not exactly a direct line. But when I got here 2 days ago, I learned that Melina and Forsberg and also Shirley Mom recently passed, and I did not know that before then. But in the last several years I've been studying Lindsborg, I got to know the names of both quite well and to see samples of their art, and they're just wonderful. And so I've become really interested in Lindsborg's legacy as an art center. That's what it appeals to me and interests me the most. I put this word challenge in here because I know when you lose people you love and you lose people that are talented, it's very challenging. And so yes, there's a challenge there with these recent losses. But I would like to, through this project, propose that we also think about challenging ourselves to become more artistic. I have a deep down belief that we are all artistic, and then what happens is, though, we label ourselves at some point saying, oh, I'm not good enough, oh, I can't draw anything but a straight line, and so we limit ourselves. This is called Growing Up Greenough because I have learned in my own life that there is this amazing artistic thread that runs through the whole Greenough family. And then the family itself, the name Greenough apparently is English, and it refers to a green hollow or a green valley somewhere in England. And this is the first draft of the talk. This is the first time it's being presented, so hopefully I won't go far over time. But if you want to get in touch with me at any time afterwards, here's my email address. It's not the shortest, but historicpreservationanddesign@gmail.com. If you write that down and keep it, we can talk more in the future about additional Pell stories or keep the conversation going on related subjects. As Ron said, I was an architectural historian and a restoration architect earlier. I have a book out called Salem's Witch House, so if you ever want to know about a 17th century house in Salem, this book is available on Amazon. And then there was the Blake House in Dorchester I helped restore, and that is Boston's oldest house. It's actually a 1661 landmark, which is just stunningly beautiful in this beautiful green park in Dorchester. So those were the kind of works I was doing earlier. My own artistic impulse is, because I think I spent so much time behind a drafting board making hard lines of different line weights, I'd like to do more freehand, and so I've been practicing making logos and stuff. So this is a logo I made about a year and 3/4 ago, and for Greenough History Initiatives. The idea would be that we'll try to get a name for what's been happening in the Greenough family, which is a lot of us descendants have been communicating by email and sharing old photographs and sharing old albums, and in the process learning a lot more about the family, and it's been a lot of fun. And this project grew out of that. So we're here today at the Sandzen Gallery, and we're officially called the B.R. Sandzen Memorial Gallery, and I'm really thrilled that Ron invited me to talk. Ron is a great guy, and he knows a lot of things, and it's a wonderful project in place here. As he mentioned, some of the staff he's got working here too. He's got Corey North as the curator, and Terrence Stout as a gallery assistant. But Growing Up Greenough, this show proposed to shine some light upon 3 artistic 20th century members of the American Greenough family who helped to improve things sort of regionally and locally for everybody, and also to create this gallery in Linsport, Kansas. That's the goal of the show. And this is a nice picture of Pell, the best one I've seen in recent years. Jim Turner took it. It's part of a photograph he took of both Pell and his wife in the 1980s, I believe. But we're going to talk about Pell here. That's the primary draw. But the other 2 artists I'd like to mention would be his wife, Margaret, who's one of the females shown in the silhouette, and then also his aunt, Ethel, who's the other female shown in the silhouette, if you use your imagination, because I don't have a good silhouette view of the 3 of them. And also locally, you can think about the Greenough legacy of the formation of this particular building and institution, but we have a house in town at 123 East State Street on the corner of 2nd, which you can also associate with the Greenoughs. Both of them lived here, in that house, when they were alive, and I went by that 2 days ago and saw that the Lundblads, is that how you pronounce it?
Lundblad.
Lundblad, thank you. Thank you very much. You wouldn't be Nancy Lundblad, would you?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not, okay. Anyway, I'm dying to meet some Lundblads. They now own what was the Greenough house, and they're also doing a nice job of saving this particular house marker, which if you look at it very closely, you can see it's got Shirley A. Malm's initials on the lower right, so it's a piece of Malm artwork as well. Here's a picture of the house. It's a great little house. But anyway, this talk, I want to talk not just about those Greenoughs, but I'd like to provide some context, and I'd like to talk about the intergenerations, because I think what happened was, in the Greenough family, there was this great sense of achievement in the past, but nobody knew specifically what the achievements were. They felt driven to buy those achievements. That may be a wasp thing anyway. My own great-grandmother is shown here. Her name was familiarly Gabo, but she was Emery Holden Greenough, and she married Henry Vos Greenough. And let me tell you, there was a sense of sort of dignity about her, but she also had a very strong art desire, and she took lessons in Boston with this artist named Nathaniel Burwash, who was known during the Depression in the 1940s. And consequently, she started painting herself, and these are a couple of her paintings that have survived of Gabo, my great-grandmother. And then there's also this guy's legacy is still floating around. Horatio Greenough is known nationally as having been the first American sculptor, which I would actually argue is probably not true, because there have been many sculptors in this country and on this continent over the millennia. But what they mean by that phrase is he was the first man to have actually worked for the federal government, to making government commissioned federal sculptures in Washington, D.C. after having been trained in Italy. And he was Boston born and bred initially, but he went to Italy and he came back with a love of Italian marble. And the Smithsonian apparently has this massive sculpture that he produced of George Washington looking very Greek. And this was on the lawn, I guess, outside the Capitol for years, and then finally it's been put in storage. But he also did other things. He did busts of people that were nice, and this wonderful one of a greyhound, which I just think is fabulous. So these are well-known sculptures of Horatio Greenough. So he is, when you think of Greenoughs in art, you typically think about Horatio. Horatia's legacy. Horatio also did some books on art and art theory. This little diagram I put together because Pell's brother, Hamilton Perkins Greenough, put together an ultimate Greenough genealogy. And when you go through that, you can sort of figure out all the generations that happened. And there's about 8 generations of American Greenoughs that happened up to Henry Vos Greenough, who was Gabo's husband. Now what's happened, my older brother has learned recently, if you follow it back, there's a couple of earlier generations in England, we now know who they were. So that, there's lots of Greenoughs here. And it does get complicated. This is my grandmother, Barbara Greenough, or Baba Greenough, and she also felt an artistic calling. In 1924, this photograph was taken. In the middle shows Baba, my grandmother, and that's Pel's first cousin. And this Baba is here with her grandparents, Charles Pelham Greenough the first on the left, and CPG the first's wife, who we call MDVG, or Mary Dwight Vos Greenough. And Mary Dwight Vos Greenough actually was a daughter of a guy named Henry Vos, who turns out was a classmate of Thoreau's at Harvard, and became good friends with Thoreau, the naturalist. And so we just learned about this recently, and that's kind of cool, I think. I always loved Thoreau. But officially, in most books, for that part of the family, it shows that Mary Dwight Vos Greenough married CPG 1 in 1874 in Boston, and they had 5 kids, is what's typically listed, even though the middle child, his daughter, died fairly young. So 4 were best known. Well, I've since learned that's not exactly accurate. There was actually a 6th child that died young, and is constantly never mentioned in most books. And that first child would have been called Charles Pelham Greenough II, and continued the CPG line through my line. But because he died, a brother of CPG 1 was allowed to run with the line and continue. So that's how CPG the third, Peter Pell, ended up becoming a cousin more distantly located geographically. But here's Baba, my grandmother, and she's doing artwork, I think back in the 40s. And she was living, you can see she kind of, I think she's wearing a striped shirt because she liked Pablo Picasso. You gotta be Pablo Picasso-esque at that time. And she did a lot of strange, surreal kind of Picasso-esque paintings, very magical, mystical things. She also did some biographical paintings. This is a picture she painted of herself in a bar slash restaurant in Provincetown on Cape Cod. And her daughter is my mother, Emery Goff, also picked up this sort of artistic drive and artistic interest because Baba was so pro-art all the time. My mother became an artist too, and she ended up doing stone sculpture. And her name is Emery Goff, E-M-E-R-Y Goff. And if you do a Google search on that, you'll find an article I wrote about her some years back and what it was like growing up with a sculptor as a mother. And my brother, an older brother, Rory, who's also a historian now, ended up becoming a scrimshaw artist. He did a lot of very fine etchings on whale's teeth and other ivory pieces. So I've been surrounded by a lot of artists in this family, and the name itself has been spelled a lot of ways over the years. The oldest way it was spelled had an H in the middle. It's typically Green Hall, H-A-L-G-H, and then it went through other ways to spell it. And the H-A-L-G-H, one of the funniest ways of spelling it was just graphically spelling it, a green O. So a lot of them just spelled a green O as a green O. So I had actually Gabbo would mark her tennis balls with a green O. That was it. Sorry, green O. And then I'm told there's a green O out in Montana, or is it in Montana? I think so, yeah. And they used to keep their sheep, the green O sheep, where again, they just painted a green O on the sheep. So that works pretty well there. And my ancestor, who was CPG the first, this was a book he kept about the Greenough family, and see, he too put a big green O on the top to just let it know it's the Greenoughs. So that's kind of fun. But CPG 1, who was, you just saw the picture of him, my grandmother's grandfather, he was not only a lawyer, but he was quite interested in family history, and he put together books and albums about the family history, and that's how we were able to know what we know today. So we're very lucky. Now, to learn a little bit about art, you got to learn about Impressionists, who started off over in France in the 1870s, and Monet was the initial one. This painting here, called Impression Sunrise, was painted in 1872 and exhibited in 1874. This was the first work that earned the term Impressionist in the art world. And then a lot of other, it radicalized everything. You didn't have to be draftsman perfect and photorealist to do an amazing painting. You could use some subjective interpretation as well. So Impressionism came to be the name for an art movement characterized by small visible brushstrokes, open composition, and bright colors. And then there were other artists that did what's called post-impressionism. But the Sandzen, so Birger Sandzen from Sweden, this little paragraph was written about him on the Swedes, the way they were.org website. And I will read this briefly. because I think it's a great description. It says, this little gallery right here, the building that we're in, was built in memory of a man who lived 3 lives in one. He was a painter, he was a teacher, he was a crusader for art. His name was Birger Sandzen. He was born in Lidsberg, Sweden in 1871, intending to make only a 2-year sojourn into this country in Mexico. He came to Lindsborg, Kansas at 23 years of age to join the Bethany College staff after he read a book by the founder of the college, Dr. Carl Swenson. Sandzen liked his new home here so much that, except for 2 trips to Mexico and 3 to Europe, he remained in the U.S. for the rest of his life. And most of these 60 years were spent at Lindsborg, 52 years as a teacher at Bethany College. And he died in June of 1954. So that gives you a little bit about Birger Sandzen in a nutshell. Now, he was also came to be called America's Van Gogh. Whoops, I think we just may have lost the mic.
Push the button.
Is that, oh yeah, it just turned red, I'm sorry. Let's see if I can get it to come back.
We'll switch out. Keep
Okay.
talking.
Okay.
Use your teacher voice.
All right, so, thank you. Can you all still hear if I speak up a little bit? Okay. So, Birger Sandzen has been called America's Van Gogh, and that's a really appropriate title because Van Gogh was very loose and very colorful and very dramatic and did things like Starry, Starry Night, which is incredible. And if you look around the paintings in this room, you can see that Birger was doing very much the same thing. So Van Gogh was a Dutch post-impressionist painter, and he created about 2,100 artworks in just over a decade. So that's all. If you can do 200 plus artworks a year, you can be in Van Gogh's category. So anyway, a lot of these artists are very prolific and they get really into their art and they do beautiful works. Going back to the Greenoughs for a second. So as I mentioned, one of the early English spellings had an H in the middle.
You're good.
So you can see it was Green Hall is the way it's sort of spelled phonetically. And this is the coat of arms that's most typically associated with the Greenoughs. And it has 3 bugles in the middle that are suspended with cords. And we believe that the H in there comes from the fact that it was Green Hollow, and it has been interpreted that way by some. This is actually, so Pell and his side of the family, this was Charles Pelham Greenough the first took this English version of a coat of arms to be his official coat of arms. So that's the one we see with the Greenoughs here in the U.S. most often. Now what's curious about that is the bugle. You know, why the bugle? I was curious about that. Well, it turns out that the bugle, the name itself, comes from the Latin bucculus, meaning it's a diminutive of the word bos for ox. And it was because the horn of an ox was used to give signals as a bugling, originally in hunting. So it was a hunting tool originally. But it's also become a sort of an emblem and a symbol for other things. It says that we've been told that hunting horns appear on coats of arms as symbols of hunting, military service, and even the pursuit of knowledge or art. And so that could have been too. I don't know the exact reason why the early Greenoughs got that design, but they did. And as I mentioned, my older brother Rory has recently, just in the last year or so, pushed back our knowledge of where the Greenoughs began in England. And so we now know that there was this earlier William Greenough, W.G. William Greenough, who lived in a place called Cople, C-O-P-L-E, which is north of London and not far from Bedford. And if you look at Cople, it's this little crossroads, T-shaped crossroads of the town. And if you go to that crossroads, you'll find the dominant landmark is this All Saints Church on the north corner. Well, it turns out that William Greenough, early on, was a vicar of that church. And a vicar, I didn't know what a vicar was, not being, anyway, it's apparently the same as a minister or a priest, and they use different terms depending on Anglican religions and different religions. But so fortunately, the church historians over there, when we contacted them asking about the Greenoughs, they sent us these pictures, and they have this in their office. They have a list of all the vicars in the years they were, inducted, as it were. So 1607, it says, was when William Greenough was inducted to be the vicar of this church in Cobble. Well, that's kind of cool. When you think about what is 1607, hello? 1607 is when Jamestown was settled in Virginia. 1607 is when the Pelham colony was started in Maine. There wasn't much European colonization of the U.S. in 1607, so it was mostly a native owned and occupied landmass. But at that time, over there, they had this beautiful stone building that dated from at least 100 years earlier, and that's where William Greenough was a vicar. And this particular William Greenough was born about 1580, we are told. So that's kind of cool. And then that William married a woman, Agnes Moore, and they had this family of at least 6 children. And the Luke son, I guess the eldest son, was one who ended up raising the William Greenough from whom Pell's brother lists all the American Greenoughs descended, which is kind of interesting. Now what's curious about this too, when you look at what's known about these early Greenoughs, there was a William Greenough born in about 1627, who died in 1678 at sea. Now that's interesting because a number of reasons. Because the first 3 generations of Greenoughs in Boston that come out thereafter are all deeply involved in the maritime trades, and they start building ships, and it's all about shipbuilding. And I think there was, and they're all named William. There's just William. You know, so it's like there's at least 6 Williams in the line. And I think what might have been happening, this you kind of got to read literally between the lines, but there may have been this sort of tragic loss of life, either from shipwreck or a sailor goes overboard or whatever it is, and then there's this death, and the family has to deal with the grief of that. And how they deal with the grief, often they'll name the newest born son after the one that just died. You know, so that happens. And there also might have been this move to get more involved with maritime trade and building quality ships because they had problems in the past. You know, that kind of thing happens too. The Bowditches that Ron mentioned earlier. The whole reason Nathaniel Bowditch became a navigator was his father was a sea captain, but also a drunk, and he ran into a ledge. And there's a Bowditch ledge in the harbor that's very embarrassing if you're a Bowditch, because you know that he failed as a navigator there in the harbor. The father did. So these things happen. You know, horrible things happen from time to time. And families have to deal with them. But anyway, the Greenoughs, we can be pretty sure, originally in the 17th century, they must have lived in a house that looked a lot like this. Probably thatched roof, no doubt timber frame, much like the Blake House that we restored before the Blake House got a wood shingle roof. Massive posts and beams. But there is this Greenough genealogy I mentioned. It's oversized, it's green covered, it's got gold lettering on the spine, and this was put together by Pell's brother, Hamilton Perkins Greenough, and this is sort of the gold standard of the Bible of the family. And this is his brother, Hammy, a younger brother, whom I believe also kind of grew up mostly in Santa Barbara, California. But Pell, here's the vital statistic about Pell in a nutshell. He was born in November of 1908 in Boston. He died in 1983 in Wichita, Kansas. And he was buried locally here in Linsport in Elmwood Cemetery. And there's the plot number if you want to look it up. I have never been there yet, but now, Margaret, his wife, let's see. Oh, yeah, I was going into Pell here. Why did Pell get the name he got? Well, he was named, there were 2 earlier Charles Pelham Greenoughs. The first one was born in 1844, he was my great-great-grandfather. And then there was also this CPG II, who was a nephew of CPG I and a son of CPG I's brother, Malcolm. So, and they all were sort of involved with Boston industry and lawyering and a gas company, and so they were, they were successful in a conventional sense. But CPG I also had deep interests in history and collecting old autographs, and that's what we've actually inherited recently. Is these albums of the early autographs and letters, and they're just fabulous. They give you a lot of sense of what's going on. But like I said, there was this. We've learned recently there was this earlier CPG II. Who died young as a baby, and that would have been, my great-grandfather's older brother had he survived, and that's the relationship, and that's where the name was going to come down. But this book, Greenough Thanksgivings, I inherited about 4 years ago, and actually I was given by a cousin who was getting up in years, and she thought I could take better care of it as time went on, so I'm very appreciative she gave it to me. This book is amazing, and in it, as I was flipping through it, it had this picture. Which, think about it, this book is being compiled by CPG I, born in 1844. And this picture is obviously about circa 1908 or 9. And look how it's titled. It says, Mrs. C.P. Greenough II. That's on the right, she's on the right. And then the baby is C.P. Greenough III, and then in quotes, Pell. So he was called Pell at a very young age when he was just a baby here. So I sent that copy of a picture of that to Ron, and he sent a similar one back. But Pell's mother was named Margaret Bliss Perkins. The Perkins is also descended from old Boston family, and the mother ended up being in Santa Barbara, California, and was buried out in Santa Barbara, California. But when you go through, these are some of the other pictures. I think Ron had this one. There's some other early pictures that show up in baby pictures. So we just recently figured out where these were probably taken in Boston, what building they were taken in. But we also learned that the mother, Margaret Bliss Perkins, married CPG II in January of 1907. And her husband, Pell's father, was a stock and bond broker. And after the parents initially got married, they lived at what was called the Torrington on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, which is sort of the premier spine in the whole Back Bay area, which is the premier late 19th century residential district. And then later they moved into 371 Marlborough Street, which is also in the Back Bay, not far from the Charles River. So here's more about the Torrington building. It was designed by Arthur Vinyl, who was Boston city architect for a while in the 1890s. And the building, here's an ad for it. Apparently it was a 6-story building, had lots of bay windows on the front, and it had suites of 10 rooms and a bath. I guess one per floor or something, or a couple per floor. Just a remarkable large buildings, large suites. And here's a picture. It's not the best picture, it's hard to see, but you can get a sense. It's a 6-story building, and it was double, 2 bays, and then 2 flat bays that had no bay windows, and then the third also had bay window on the right side of the building. So that was that. And these are some more pictures of CPG II holding his son, and Pell's mother on the right looking on. And when you blow this up, I just love this picture. I just think that that's Pell, you know? And he kept that face through his entire life. Now, had there been a fortune teller back then who was looking at the young babe, in 1909, would she have been able to foresee that the Titanic was going to go down 1912, just 3 years later, and then World War I started, in the 19-teens, and then by the 30s, though, we find that Margaret Sandzen, his future wife, is actually in Mexico producing artworks like this, which I just think is stunning artwork. And then not long after that, in the early 40s, you get Pearl Harbor, and the whole world is at war. But as the world is going to war, Kansas emerges as this sort of central, safe sanctuary. That's at least my theory. And so by 1942, Pell has met Margaret, and they fall in love, and they get married. This is a picture taken in her father Berrier's studio with one of his artworks in the back, a mural showing the horses in the landscape. So this is a 1942 wedding picture. And then in 1943, this picture was taken, I think probably in the Grandel studio here in Lindsborg. So again, this idea of sanctuary, I think Kansas emerges as a sanctuary, and Lindsborg specifically is recognized as this amazing art center, very creative art center. So now, not long after they got married in 42, it seems the Greenows provided the Sandzens with a tour of old New England, during which time Berrier prepared new artwork showing some various sites in Rockport, Mass., which is just north of Boston on Cape Ann, and also in Brookline, which is west of Boston, where the Greenows had settled. And so let me show you this picture, for example. This is a photograph of what's called in Brookline, Mass., the Temple of Love. And it's in Lars Anderson Park in Brookline, Mass. And so what's neat about this is if you go through all the Sandzen etchings and artworks, you'll find one that shows this building, recognizably identical. So he was there making an artwork of this, recording it, which is kind of cool. And when you get into it, why was he there? Why were they all there? Well, it turns out that the mother, Margaret Bliss Perkins Greenough, Pell's mother, was a first cousin once removed of Isabel Perkins Anderson. So Lars Anderson's wife was a cousin of Pell's mother. That's how it works. And Lars Anderson and Lars Anderson's wife were very wealthy, very influential. And let's go back. Actually, let me show you a picture I just found the other day. I found this wonderful portrait. There's a portrait that shows on the right, that's Lars Anderson. And on the left is his wife, Isabel. And Lars, if you look up what they say about him, he was a bon vivant. He was a good lover of life. But he was also became U.S. ambassador to Japan, which is very interesting. So they were always giving parties. They knew how to entertain. And when they left Japan, they were given, apparently, these sculptures, these bronze sculptures, which have been preserved beautifully here in Lindsborg. This, 2 days ago, Ron showed me, is the caption out here in the courtyard. It says, Fluted Lotus Temple Bowl bronze was cast in Japan in the mid to late Tokugawa period as a gift to Birrie from Mrs. Anderson. So that's very cool. That's the bowl. And then, look at the bowl. You got dragons coming up the legs and stuff. It's like, that's pretty amazing. And then you've also got these other sacred pieces, I suppose, are from temples, whatever, right? This is Ron might know more about this than I would, whether this is actually a Buddha on the back of a sacred animal of some sort, I don't know. But
Bodhisattva, I think.
Bodhisattva, very good. So an enlightened Bodhisattva, very cool. So anyway, but again, what a wonderful gift and what a wonderful way of setting a high mark, a high benchmark, a high bar for the quality of this as a museum and as a cultural center, and really for all of Lindsborg. Now, as I was digging into it more, I found out that, well, here we go. So here we go now with the logo for the current gallery, an aerial photograph of the current gallery, and the courtyard, as you all probably know, is behind the building on the west side of the building, where those artworks are preserved now, and there's a new addition being built behind that. I throw this little artwork in here. This is actually on exhibit in a nearby room of this building. I like it because it's emblematic of a Dala horse and the spirit of Lindsborg, you know, and a Swedish-American settlement. And here's my thought. I just learned the other day that in addition to having all these Japanese bronze artworks, the Andersons also managed to collect bonsai trees. And it said, I read in a description of the Andersons, they created a bonsai collection. After Lars's death, Isabel donated 30 of her bonsai trees to the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, along with the funds necessary to build a shade house for the display. And then later, 9 additional plants were donated to the Arboretum, including an 80-year-old cypress, blah, 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 had been given to the Andersons by the imperial household shortly before they left Japan for the last time. So my recommendation as a preservation consultant, Ron, would be that we should write the Arnold Arboretum and request to either get some bonsais back here or get more information on the bonsais so we can either interpret an exhibit about those bonsais, or do something to kind of play up the whole Japanese-American / Kansas connection. I think that would be pretty cool. So here's a Japanese flag, and that's my challenge to you guys. I'd love to help with that. If I can help in any way, you know, get something coming back from Harvard, that would be wonderful. Rory went to Harvard. Maybe he can do a, you know, kind of like an alumni appeal or something in reverse. But anyway, this is the gallery today. As you can see, it's got stunning paintings all around. Here's Ron again, very vital and animated, interpreting them. And again, Pell, I know, worked, and his wife, Margaret, worked very hard to set up the foundation and to create this place. They also, though, coming to Kansas as the middle, you know, this was an interesting branch for the Greenoughs of Boston, as it were. And if you look at how the Greenoughs evolved over time, I mentioned shipbuilding. Well, it turns out initially, I'll go through this pretty quickly. This is a little, the family history in a nutshell. So they come over 3,000 miles, they sail across the sea to go to Massachusetts, right? There's the boat going across, so they go across. And then once they're there, there's actually a Greenough Lane right in downtown Boston now, in the north end of Boston, which has grown up around where they settled. And they built a shipyard, and they just started building ships. And there is still a 17th century gravestone at the Copp's Hill burial site of William Greenough, who was the first shipbuilder in Massachusetts, the first Greenough shipbuilder in Massachusetts. It's a beautiful gravestone. It's right in the Copp's Hill Cemetery. And we thought for years that this was the first Greenough, and he is the first American Greenough. But, so that's William Greenough. And then what were they doing? They were building ships. Well, building ships back then, they were all wooden ships, and they were hand-hewn. Basically, you're felling trees, and you're taking adzes and axes and pit saws, and you're crafting these bulbous frames and setting up frame by frame and fastening them all with mortises and tenons. And here's some shipwrights building, they're hewing the timbers using an adze, A-D-Z-E. And so this was going on, and then once you get all the frame up, you then put the planking, or the strakes, as they're called, they drill holes and they put the trunnels through, and they pound the trunnels with a mallet. So here's a shipwright building the frame of a vessel, and then because the horizontal outside members are called strakes, which is a variation of the word streak, you get also the word lap strake for a hull of a ship where the strakes are lapped, is a lap strake. But anyway, so you had generations of early shipbuilding in Boston that was happening because of the Greenoughs. But then you also get this sort of cultural evolution where they can start to hire other painters. So there was a John Smyburn who was a painter, an American painter, and he did this painting of Thomas Greenough, who was a son of one of the shipbuilders in Boston. It's a gorgeous painting. It survives in California today. It's very important as an early American work of early American art. There's Thomas. He's generation number 3, if you go by the old style of numbering the generations. And then coming on down to the line, you find there was another Greenough who started making these, they call them, they were mathematical instruments is what they were. So compasses and surveyors' instruments were being made. So here, in a nutshell, the first 6 generations of Greenoughs in America. You've got William, who's the shipbuilder. You've got his son John, who works in the shipyard. You've got John's son Thomas, who starts doing these mathematical instruments. Then you get a reverend in there, Reverend William Greenough, and then another William, who's a hardware store merchant. And then by generation 6, you get William Whitwell Greenough, who is known the most for having been the developer of the Boston Public Library. So WWG, as they call William Whitwell Greenough, he was sort of a king in the family. He was very well known. He was very well educated, very prominent. Here's a whole biographical thing about him from AmericanAristocracy.com. It talks about him going to Harvard and going to Boston Latin School. He wanted to become an Oriental scholar, but he instead joined his father's hardware firm. Then he becomes an agent in the Boston Gaslight Company. And he continues his interest in Oriental studies as a member of the American Oriental Society. And then he joins a lot of historical societies. But he also becomes president of the Boston Public Library and a trustee of the Museum of Fine Arts. Well, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston is known to this day as the MFA. And so that's kind of interesting. This little chart gives you a glimpse of the family descent from William Whitwell Greenough, this Boston Public Library guy, and his wife, Catherine Scully Curtis Greenough, and their 4 kids, and how Baba's line comes down in sort of the middle here, but Ethel and Pell's line is over here on the right, comes through Malcolm, Brother Malcolm. So that's sort of a partial tree of the family. And one of the early Greenough family's houses was in Cambridge here, if you look at the aerial photograph. This is a picture of the graveyard of William Whitwell and his wife, Catherine Scully Greenough. So that's kind of curious. So William Whitwell is remembered quite well. And I have just found in the last couple of years that we have all sorts of photographs and art paintings of WWG. Hamilton, Pell's brother, sent a picture of this to my grandmother, Baba. And this is a picture of WWG that was painted by this fellow, George Peter Alexander Healy, who was apparently practicing in Boston as an artist. So that's a nice portrait. I think, that boy was born in 1818, so this might be an 1820s picture, nice. But again, look at in the background, you got this globe as a prop, showing his worldly ambition, and an open book showing probably that he was literate. So William Whitwell Greenough had ambitions. Here's Mr. Healy, the artist, in a more full-figured view. And then we have at least 5 or 6 wonderful portraits of WWG that have come down to us. So this one, W.W. Greenough, 1858. Another one here with a top hat, looking very official. This must be a professional, studio photograph taken in Boston. This one it's frequently reproduced. He's got a mustache by this time in his life. And here he is with the mustache again. Now, what's kind of cool is if you go to the Boston Public Library today and you go into the old part of that building and where the stair hall is, you will encounter this. which is a white marble portrait of William Whitwell Greenough. And you look at the picture of it at the time, it's pretty good. It's a good likeness. And this apparently was sculpted in 1889, the same year as the Paris Centennial Exposition. And it was sculpted by an artist in the family whose name was not Horatio Greenough, but Richard Saltonstall Greenough, who was one of Horatio's brothers. So this is another very well-known Greenough sculptor produced this artwork. That's in the Boston Public Library, which this is a picture of the BPL facing Copley Square. So I hold and propose that this building, the BPL, was such a monumental achievement for Boston and New England and the Greenough family that the legacy and knowledge of this contribution not only amazed Pell Greenough, but haunted him. I think it haunted him. This, what are you going to do to equal what what your ancestor William Whitwell Greenough did? And I think that that's what drove him ultimately to produce a beautiful brick building like the one we're in today. I do hold them as being very similar as major contributions, cultural landmarks, produced by the Greenoughs with Greenough money. And I think that was probably front and center in Pell. But I never met Pell, so I can't ask him about it. But here's a little bio on Richard Saltonstall Greenough, who was the brother of Horatio. And he was a prolific and wonderful sculptor as well. His sculptures are all over Boston. Here's a picture of Richard Saltonstall Greenough. Now, in the BPL, there's talk about WG also being a trustee of the Museum of Fine Arts. Well, I thought the Museum of Fine Arts in its early years, I'd heard that it was near where the BPL evolved. And I thought it was like over here in this area north of the BPL where this church exists. But I've since learned that I was wrong about that. The church is older than I thought, and in fact, it's where, 100 feet away on the south side of Copley Square is what's now called the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel. It looks like this, and this was where the MFA was when it was first built, and when the Greenoughs were involved with it, and it looked like that. So that's a picture of the south side of Copley Square, probably in the 1880s, when WWG was involved with that as well. So you get WWG, WWG is also a trustee of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So Museum of Fine Arts has since gotten larger and moved out to Huntington Avenue in Boston, where it occupies this building. But it did start right in Boston, and the Greenoughs had a hand in that too. Now, we were going to talk about some other Greenoughs, like Ethel, for example. So here's a picture of William Whitwell Greenough. This is from an album that his son, Charles Pelham Greenough I, put together. So Charles Pelham Greenough I says, this picture shows my son's grandfather, meaning my father, WWG. And here's the dates of his father's birth and death and marriage. And he notes that WWG married Catherine in 1841. She was a daughter of Charles P. Curtis. This is where it kind of gets sort of interesting. Here's Catherine. This is WWG's wife. And she was a Curtis initially. And she was also very artistic. This was her logo for CSG, Catherine Scully Greenough, after she married into the Greenough family. The Scully name in there really is an old Boston name too. There's a Scully Square that became Government Center in Boston, so it's an old Boston name. But the CPC is interesting. The Charles Pelham Curtis was Catherine's father. So this is where all the Charles Pelham Greenoughs and Pell get the Pell from. It came through Charles Pelham Curtis. Charles Pelham Curtis then was an ancestor. He was a lawyer in Boston. He was Catherine's father. Here are his initials. And when you look him up, you find from AmericanAristocracy.org that here are his dates. He was a lawyer. And then all it says about him and his contributions, he was reputed to be worth $100,000 in 1851, mostly inherited. Well, that was a lot of money back then. I'm just saying, at that time, if you had $4,000 accumulated by the time you died, you were quite well to do. So to get $100,000 is kind of remarkable. That is a stunner when you think about it. So I haven't done the research to figure out where all that money came from, but I did find out that the Curtis family had this not only love of art as well, but they had connections to Italy. And in fact, if you go to Venice, there's a book that came out recently called Ralph W. Curtis and the Palazzo Barbero. And it turns out that one of these Curtises purchases an ancient palazzo on the Grand Canal in Venice in 1885. And he moved Curtis, this younger Curtis, this Ralph W. Curtis, would have been a cousin, I guess, to all the Greenough Curtises. He moved to Paris to study art, and it goes on from there. So that's a book worth reading. I haven't read yet. But this is a picture of the Palazzo Barbero, and it's apparently a couple of joined buildings together, and it's right on the Grand Canal. And it attracted all sorts of Boston socialites in the 19th century and Boston artists, and so these paintings were made showing them enjoying the building, like this one. Now this is Isabella Stewart Gardner being over there. She was invited by the Curtises, and she loved the Palazzo. And she loved the Palazzo so much, it is said, that she determined that once she got back, she was going to create her Palazzo in Boston. Now her Palazzo became the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And it's been described as an Italian palazzo that's been made inside out. It's got the greenery on the inside and the courtyard, and it's very sort of plain on the outside. But it's very lush and detailed in the middle. Unfortunately, they had, I think, the nation's largest art heist happened decades ago, and it's still, the art crime has never been solved, so that's a shocker. But this is a beautiful building, and it shows the connection of the Curtises to the Gardners. And some of these paintings showing this sort of love of Italian life in the late 19th century are a lot of fun. These are some sort of post-impressionistic paintings of on the gondolas on the canal. And this picture specifically is said to show Emma Zorn, Jack Gardner, Isabella Gardner, and Anders Zorn in gondolas 1894. Well, you think about Zorn, wasn't he a teacher? He was a teacher of Berriere?
Yeah.
Right, so talk about a small world. It's like, seriously, they're all doing things together and knowing each other and visiting each other, and it was a very rich and culturally enriched society. So looking at Lindsborg, I see now that my time is running out. I see the sand is just dribbling on this hourglass. So this town was settled by Swedish-American settlers in 1869. I have a T-shirt that proves that. Pastor Olaf Olsson is credited with the initial religious settlement. This is the Swedish flag, from which you can see the blue and yellow colors are very dominant. And Lindsborg and other Swedish-American settlements pick up on the blue and the yellow, and also the dollar horse is a symbol. So blue and yellow are good colors, and when you had your annual Thanksgiving or Swedish honoring festival, blue and yellow become prominent colors. This is an older picture that I found on the internet, and again, I was not here for the festival, but I understand that you get a lot of wonderful display of colors. And also here at Bethany, those are your college colors, blue and yellow, again, because it's a Swedish settlement. If you're looking at eBay and you want to get a good Lindsborg souvenir, I found this is a Bethany College picture that was being sold a few months back with a wonderful painting of the original Old Main, thank you, the landmark building that got torn down. Here's another print of the Old Main building, and here's a blow-up of. So if you want to know how people are doing in Lindsborg, you can say that you raise high rollers, right? These are high roller people who just enjoying the big wheel bicycles. I love this. This looks like a block print, perhaps. Signed John Basher. Okay, it's great. I just love the art. It's just great. Lindsborg is so lucky to have had this artistic legacy, and all the artists have come through. I propose that you could also call this town an artland in America's heartland. Take that one and run with it as you will. You have full permission to run with that for any T-shirt you want for the future fundraiser. Just saying. Now, Berriere, getting back to him, so he taught art and other subjects here for over 50 years, and some of the art offerings seem to have included oil painting, watercolor painting, drawing, sculpture, linoleum block printing, lithography, and woodcut printing. Obviously, he's dealing with lots of beautiful colors, and some of the students wanted to learn how to do representational works. Others would have been more interested in just sort of abstract compositions. But what you're dealing with here is this amazing creativity and this amazing ability to look at things. Now, everybody loves fireworks, everybody loves color, and what is pointillism but fireworks or color and point-based colors to look at how life is perceived that way. The French artist Seurat is credited with developing pointillism. But you look around this building and this room at what Berrier was doing, he's got that same technique of using the pointillist style for a number of years in his career, and came up with some incredible versions of life all around him, nature perceived in a stunning way, and that is just, just exalting. Gorgeous colors, great compositions. The colors are really almost magical and mythical. If they really were like that, you'd wonder what planet you're on. But you don't have to worry about it. You can enjoy it. And then, as I dug into this further too, I ran into little bits of Swedish language, and I learned that there was a Svedal named for an original settlement for part of Lindsborg, and I guess that originally meant Swedish Valley, and Sved is Swede, Dal is the Dale or Valley. And so Gröndal, your photographer, came from Grön, meaning green, and Dal, valley or hollow, so Green Valley. So actually the Greenough, for being Green Valley or Green Hollow, is a close cousin of the Gröndal. So it's very, very similar original meaning. Here's a little aerial view. We're flying through a green valley, just to let you know that Gröndal, your photographer, would have loved green valleys. He was a very prominent photographer here in Lindsborg. This is a picture of one of his early title blocks on one of his photographs. I've been working with Lenora Lyman to look at some of the old photos of Lindsborg that are now online, courtesy of the Lindsborg Old Mill and Swedish Heritage Museum. And we've been finding that not only are there some amazing photographs that with a little enhancement you can see more in them than you could before, but even the style of the title blocks changes over time. And Gröndal always loves the color green, because Green Valley or Green Dale is his name. But here's how he looked when he was early on in Lindsborg, and he had a beard. In later years, he cleaned up, as they say, he cleans up well, right? They looked really good. So imagine for a second that this is Gröndal, and Berrier has stepped into the studio. And Berrier Sandzen was born in 1871, and the picture was taken in 1895. Do the math, that's 24 years old. So a 24-year-old boy steps into the studio, and what does Berrier do? Boom! He flashes, and he gets this. So there you go. There's Berrier Sandzen in 1895, looking very sporty, I might say. And then a short 5 years later, he is marrying Alfreda Lexell, and they had one child with Margarita or Margaret. So here they are as a married couple, and great portrait, again, courtesy of Gröndal. And Margaret was likely the first Swedish-American person from the American Midwest states to ever marry into the old Boston Greenough family. I don't know any other Swedish-American Greenoughs in existence. Here's a picture of her gravestone, and you can see she was actually born in 1909, so she was 1 year younger than Pell. And here she is as a young girl being pushed by her father, the artist. These pictures were donated to me courtesy of Ron, so thank you very much, Ron. These are lovely pictures. This is very close to where they lived at the time, early 20th century, on 2nd Street, not far from where we are now. In the background, you've got this little building with the homemade concrete blocks, as I used to have. And here she is with her mother. As Margaret got older, she had a great face, which really, again, it didn't change much either. If you look at there to there, that's the same person. And then, in 1942, there's a lot of things going on in the world, like World War II, and so you may never have heard the story of, the leading news story of the century, of that year was two of America's most interesting artistic families merged and joined, the Sandzens and the Greenoughs, and they got married. And then here's a picture of the studio with that, showing the painting that was in the background in their wedding shot. Here's earlier pictures of the Greenough house at 2nd and State Streets, and the fabulous 50s. We've got them here, I believe, enjoying art, going out as a family, the in-laws. And then for Margaret, Margaret obviously was very proud of her father's art, and she wanted to see it preserved properly, so she and Pell together created the foundation to build the building to preserve the art. And Pell had a special interest in the lithographs that Berrier had done. And this is a great picture of him. I was told before this show that Pell was dapper, and And I think that's a great word to describe him. His dapperness comes across. And then there's this, as I said earlier, this 1982 picture that Jim Turner took. I think is top notch and an amazing portrait of the two of them. And that was clearly taken on this ground, right in front of a wall and a bench. Is that the courtyard? Yeah, is that what you meant? Yeah.
Courtyard,
Yes, great shot. And so Pell's gravestone is also in this town, and he died in '83, as we said earlier. Oh, I didn't mention though, I've also learned that the middle name Pelham, which comes all through the family, that also has a strong art heritage behind it. There was a Peter Pelham artist born in London who practiced early on in Boston, and there's also a Henry Pelham who was a engraver, who was a half-brother of John Singleton Copley. So go figure, the Pelhams were artistic also. This is a Pelham artwork. Stunning. Oh, but getting back to Pell, so he did early on in his, in his art interest, he did a whole inventory and a book on the graphic work of Sandzen, and he really focused on the black and white prints. He loved that, but he also liked etching. And I have not seen the original of this, but I'm told that this is a picture of the bottom part of one of Pell's etchings. It was titled "Part of America's Cup." And when I read that, I kind of Google image search for America's Cup trophies, there was a time when this fabulous silver pitcher of unbelievable proportions was given as a prize for winning America's Cup race. And so Pell was drawn to that and literally drew that or etched it on probably a sheet of copper and did a copper etching, and then numbered it and wrote his initials on it. And so he did some etching. That's known. Margaret also is a stunning artist in her own right. I love this piece. This one she did. Girl in Swedish costume, and I guess it's a portrait of, how do you pronounce that? Signy? Signy. Thank you. I have a tough time with the Swedish language. Signy. Okay. Great portrait though. So that was hers. This is her father, Birger, did this one. I just show it because of the blue background and the still life aspect of it. Now this is a similar kind of blue background and still life aspect that Margaret did. So it's interesting. It might have been the same backdrop they were using. Who knows? Nice colors and nice composition, and she does bold colors, nice still lifes. These are all Margaret's. This etching, she did etchings too. Apparently, there's this Witham Village etching, 1933. She must have been over in England. And then Nancy Greenough out in California recently sent me a picture of this picture. She has, I guess, of Margaret painting of Kansas. Clearly, you've got these shocks of wheat gathered in the field. And that's the old way that wheat was harvested before the invention of various mechanical machines and all. But that's a great one. Here's the old gathering of the shocks of wheat. And the shock of wheat also then became an emblem for bounty and abundance. This one I love. This is a Margaret. It's not the best copy of it, but I believe it's a watercolor of a Kansas scene. We're looking west, I believe, out of Lindsborg on a road. And maybe it's the same road we came in a couple days ago. I'm not totally sure, but I love the landscape. And then she did some barns and farm scenes that are nice. And this one's a little bit kind of loose, and it's also not totally in focus, but you can see she's developing artistic skills. And then this is a slightly bleached later picture showing her in front of two portraits she did, one of her husband and one of her father. Wonderful portrait. And then Ethel, we mentioned Ethel briefly. So again, she was a granddaughter of WWG and also granddaughter of Catherine. And she was a daughter of Malcolm Greenough. We haven't heard much about him. Malcolm's wife was Lizzie Tiffany Greenough, and she's shown here. So Ethel grows up. She was a brother to CPG2, who was Pell's father. And so she was an aunt to Pell. And here's a little print that shows the four major siblings in Ethel's family. You can see that CPG2, who was Pell's father, was Ethel's younger brother. Right? She was born in 79, he was born in 83. And then these other Greenoughs as well. But we have in our albums that we've inherited, there's a nifty cyanotype or blue tinted image showing Ethel. So here she is as a young lady, probably in Boston. I think it says 1891 to 92. This when it was taken. And we've blown it up there. And so she was born in '79. She died in 1964 out in California. And she's buried, though, in Independence, Missouri. Here she is in black and white. There's another picture of her a little bit older. And this picture I just think is great. This is a little bit more dramatic shot, owned by the Portsmouth Athenaeum in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And they end up preserving a bunch of Greenough pictures because the Greenoughs married into the Wendell family. The Wendells have a mansion in Portsmouth. So that's how a lot of Greenough pictures ended up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. But Ethel's father was Malcolm S. Greenough, who was a general assistant with the Gas Light Company in Boston. And so that's where their money came from. They resided for a while right next to Charles Street on Beacon Hill, Boston, which is, again, one of the nicer neighborhoods. And here's a picture of the houses they were growing up in. Here's interior pictures of gatherings, like they would all attend these same Thanksgiving gatherings. And now I've just thrown together a few pictures I found of her paintings. We have this unidentified seascape, probably in Maine, I'm guessing. I don't know that for a fact. And then here's her signature, Ethel Greenough Holmes. She married, I think, an attorney named Holmes. He lived out in Kansas City, Missouri for a while. Here's a painting showing fall foliage at an unknown location. And 10 years ago, this very museum in Corey North put together a publication on the 40 years of the Prairie watercolor paintings. When you go through that catalog, you find this page, which shows two of Ethel's paintings. The top one, called A Gay Morning, shows all these beautiful colored flowers in a garden, but I don't know where the garden is. You know, it could be Massachusetts, it could be Kansas, I just don't know. The bottom one, labeled Harbor Scene, is very easy to identify once you know Massachusetts. That's Marblehead, Mass. Right there. That's Abbott Hall, which is their town hall with its large brick tower in the middle. And Marblehead is known, or promotes itself as the yachting capital of New England. And it's all about boats and the harbor views. And we know the Greenoughs also kept boats in Rainbow View, so that could be why they were there. Now, just recently, a few months ago, I was sent by my cousin Nancy Greenough in California a photo that purported to show Ethel Greenough Holmes' garden sculpture. And then we noted that it looked an awful lot like this sculpture right over here to my right, which has been kept by the museum here. And so we think that, in fact, what we got is, we think is that this, which the tag here says, an unknown maker, I think this is one of Ethel's sculptures, and I think it may have been an early version and a test to this larger sculpture that Nancy has out in California. So here's a picture showing Verrier in his studio. You can see, kind of on the left there's this woman holding her knees. And that's the sculpture we're talking about. That's right over here behind me now. And then here's a close-up of that. And when you go out to California, this is what you see. That's the same. That's a very similar sculpture in the Greenough Garden to this day. So that could be the same one. Ethel, here's some statistics about her. She was listed as a painter in the 1917 American Art Directory. She was the Kansas City Arts patron. She was a student of Verrier Sandzen. She helped get some mountain paintings painted, and she presented the Great Peak painting to the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City in 1938. And Verrier Sandzen went up to Kansas City for that, and a lot of other artists were there at the same time. So Ethel plays this role of being an older family member to Pell, and an art lover herself, and an artist herself, but sort of most importantly, here's a picture of the mountain painting that she helped Verrier painted, the Great Peak, whatever. Both of these are ones that she helped get painted. And it was donated to this museum. Here's the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City. But I would argue that Ethel's strongest contribution was the fact that she was kind of a matchmaker for Pell and for Margaret, that she apparently helped convince Pell to marry Margaret. And he did propose, and they did get married, and they did have a wonderful career and life here in Lindsborg. And because of their life, we now have a gallery, a whole art movement, and an exhibit today. So thank you very much for your time. That's the show. we're 10 minutes over, so I apologize for that overrun. I'll take questions if you want, or if you want any. You can also send me questions by email if you want to. If you wrote down my email address, I'll take your.
Pelham was the name Pelham is another family.
Yeah, it's another family. There was a.
In Boston?
I think in Boston and in England. Right, that's right. And I haven't really researched that much, but yeah, that was an old family also. That's right. It's an inherited name. Yeah, I didn't make that too clear. Yeah, next. Okay.
I was thinking that I knew that Beverly Sills was one of his nieces, or
Not a niece.
somewhere in that family, and how
Yeah,
does
so-
she fit?
Very good. The question was, how does Beverly Sills fit in? Beverly Sills married my grandmother's brother. So my grandmother Barbara Greenough Bradley, had an older brother Peter Bulkley Greenough, and he had 2 wives over his life. And his second wife was Beverly Sills. His earlier wife was Jane Thomas, and she was a harp player, so he was drawn to artists, and performers. And then he fell in love with Beverly later. So Beverly, the Beverly Sills connection is, I should have mentioned it, I didn't, that's my fault. But it's interesting, so Beverly Sills ends up, and her husband Peter ended up having a house on the vineyard very close to where my grandmother Baba had a house. And Baba would be over there a lot, and they'd be talking art. It's just very interesting. So the Sills connection, they had a lot more money than our branch of the Greenoughs, partly because Peter Bulkley Greenough was trained in finance and was a financial consultant for the Boston Globe, I believe, as well as a newspaper guy. So they did very well, and they had a place in New York City and a place on the vineyard. But they also had this love of art. Yeah.
Did you know that Peter and Beverly were here in Lynchburg?
No, I didn't.
Right next door.
Next door?
Yeah, I spent probably 15 minutes with them. I'm Jim Turner.
Oh, excellent. Nice to meet you.
So I met a lot of people here, but yeah, they were really interested in my.
Well, they would be, wouldn't they? Because Peter had a strong interest in the Greenough history. And his middle name is Bulkley, which is another one of these old New England names. There was a Bulkley, I forget. Oh yeah, I think the first minister of Concord, Mass. was a Bulkley. So, but if you do a Google search for Peter Bulkley Greenough, you'll find that one of the things they gave, I think it was the Museum of Fine Arts, is this silver pitcher, an early Greenough pitcher was given to them. It's like they had these amazing antiques, and they gave some of them to museums and stuff too. So they definitely had a love of inheritance and culture. Well, Jim, thank you very much for the unauthorized use of your photograph. I pirated your photograph to show.
I'll send you a bill.
Okay, next, yeah.
I'm from Salina, and when I was in junior high and high school, I studied trumpet here with Professor Rosenberg at Bethany College.
Oh,
And I loved Sandzen's art, and so I would wander down here after Presser Hall and walk around, and guess who was almost always at the desk was Margaret Greenough, and my name is Greta Lagerberg, and her name was Greta, also the Swedish. Greta's the name is Swedish. The Swedish is Margaret. And so think of this: as a young kid, I got to talk to her, and she walked around this museum with me and talked about art for about 6, 8 years. So I have goosebumps telling you this story. I'm just so thankful for the experience, and thank you for coming and sharing more.
wow. Well, thank you. This has been a real joy for me. I had no idea that I would learn so much in the few years since I gave that picture to Ron, but I've learned a ton of stuff, and it's been eye-opening. And the neatest thing I would say is that it's opening up lots of doors in a lot of directions. So even out of this, right before the talk, we were saying, if you're serious about this, somebody should be gathering these stories and doing a really nice book about Pell and Margaret. That would be really a nice thing to do. They didn't have kids, as far as I know, and so we are sort of left with the job of telling their story. But, I did see one more hand go up. I think that went down again. So if anybody has another question, yeah.
In short, where did the Greenough money come from? Was it shipbuilding, or?
No,
I've heard different stories.
Well, that's a question I've been asking myself too, because it's no, seriously. And I think the answer is there are multiple sources. So multiple sources, depending upon what period you're looking at and which branch of the Greenoughs you're looking at. So, for example, I do believe the shipbuilding was a profitable enterprise, and somehow they made that into a lucrative business early on. But the mercantile, they were doing a lot of stuff like was it the fourth or fifth generations, they were doing mercantile work in Boston, running a hardware store. I think that was also doing, when Boston was a booming maritime port, and their ships were going all over the world and bringing back all kinds of goodies. That must have been lucrative as well. But I think, in our modern sense of the family, I think a lot was done with trusts and investments, and there's a connection with, bonds, and so like Pel's father, I just learned, was a stock and bond broker, apparently, in 1907. So, there's this whole financial knowledge that's passed down and required that allows them to make money as well. But I would say that there was periodically a need to replenish the money after everybody's so freely spending it on, travel and things. So getting back to where we started here with my great-grandmother, so with Gabbo, this is what we called her, so she was Emery Holden Greenough, and we don't hear much about the Holdens, but yeah, the Holdens are an amazing story too. It turns out that the original Liberty Emery Holden was her father, and he started off as one of 12, poor children of a Maine farmer in Raymond, Maine. They're just getting by. They're just struggling intensively, and he becomes educated enough to become a teacher, and then he moves out to Ohio and he becomes a lawyer, and then through his law career he finds out that people are investing in some mineral mines in Salt Lake City, so he's sent to go out there and inspect the mines and see if they're worth investing in. And apparently the story that I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, the one I heard was that he went out there and he saw it was worth investing in, but he told his partners, no, it's not worth investing in, so you can sell your shares to me. So apparently he acquired a majority of the shares, and then it did become like a major copper mine or a silver mine, and had tons of money that way, so it's like, whoa, So I don't know the answer to all those things, but I do know that there was, among old Boston families, there were old ways of doing things, and I guess, socializing together and maintaining all your communications and sailing together, all these things were done so you can also, be wondering how the family's going to reshape and who's going to be admitted and who's, what I'm saying? It's a complicated thing. Yeah, who's going to marry who exactly? So, yeah, up front.
Just a comment. In a conversation with Pelham one time, he said, I chose very unwisely from my trust portfolio in terms of building of this gallery. I sold all of my Coca-Cola and my IBM stock.
No.
Chosen from
No. Oh, my. Well, I hope building on that, Ron, that you're taking notes and that we can write corporate benefactor letters to Coke and IBM request a reimbursement of the equal value in modern interests. That's hilarious. I hadn't heard that. Thank you for sharing that one. Yes?
I think Pelham had been married once before,
Yes, I heard that too.
and do you know anything about that?
I don't know a thing about it. Ron might be able to share a little bit of that.
I think she was a socialite that lived in Santa Barbara, and I think they were married for maybe 5 years, and somehow the marriage dissolved, and he eventually kind of made his way, began corresponding with Margaret again, and they again developed, because they first met in 1930, and then kind of broke it off. Pelham went and got married. Margaret traveled a lot, and spent time in Lindsborg too, but eventually kind of got reunited in the 1940s, and then eventually got married in 42.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for using a teacher voice. I could hear that fine without
I do have it.
So I'm hoping that, out of this and out of these discussions, maybe we can push some more snowballs down the hill, as it were, and try to get some more stories recorded and do things with it. It is a great and interesting heritage. Yes?
Yeah. I always wondered if there's ever a photographic record of Pelham and Margaret's house. When I was a kid, I would always shovel their walk, and when I was done, they would both grab me and haul me inside, and we'd sit at the table, and we would all three have cookies and hot chocolate.
Wow.
And it was so cool because the house was just full of antiquities.
Wow.
And a lot of Oriental objects.
Oh, yeah.
That you can see in the gallery now here.
Wow.
But it was the coolest place as a kid to hang out. They were so gracious.
Is there a
Very nice
Lindsborg Historical Society? Would they have collections
I
of all?
think there are some pictures of the inside.
Okay. That would be very cool to see. You're
I
right.
think in our archives, we do have, I think they did a room by room photographs. They're not great photos,
Nice.
but they're kind of Polaroids, probably for insurance purposes, but we do have those in the archives. So Eric, stop by sometime and we'll look
And then
through.
there's some of us who visited
Yep,
there often.
yep. Very cool.
Dan?
Another question, yes.
I was just gonna say one thing about Margaret. I loved her dearly, but my mother was named Margaret, and so they became great friends. And in that time, I learned a lot about Margaret, but I went to a lot of meetings about doing things to better Lynchburg. And Margaret said, yes, we wanna get better, but we don't want people, they just mess things up.
There you go.
That's what she
So,
said.
that's a great quote, but I wouldn't put that on a bumper sticker. It wouldn't work well. That's funny. But you know, I run into that same attitude. One of my first jobs out of college was researching shipbuilding in Connecticut, and I was sent to Essex, Connecticut, where they were just starting to form the Essex. It was the Connecticut River Museum in Essex, and they had an old steamboat dock building, and they have since made it into a museum. But I remember just being blown away by the beauty of Essex, Connecticut. It's right on the Connecticut River, and everywhere you looked, it was gorgeous. And I said, "This is an amazing, town. Why isn't it promoted better?" And people would look at me and scowl. It's like the same idea. We don't want people. That's the same awareness. And there's a truth to that, There's a truth to that, because things do change with new people. The question is, what kind of change, and how are you going to control the change? What do you value? And if you do value something, I've learned through I can't say decades and decades, but through some experience, the best approach is to be proactive. Figure out ahead of time what you really cherish and work to make sure that there are preservation mechanisms in place to preserve that now, before it gets to be a heated battle at the 11th hour. Just saying. Yeah. I've done a lot of preservation battles in my year, and when you're up against a better funded, more corporate, oriented, highest and best use argument for why a beautiful building should be torn down, it's hard to rally the troops against that sometimes. Just saying. Well, thank you all very, very much. You've been very, very